Hey guys, today we're going to go ahead and cover how to configure hybrid filtering for your WSGA or AP Web with the hybrid module. I like to begin all my videos by first showing quick ways you can find the information yourself on our WebSense support portal. It's very easy to do, and there's a couple specific articles that I want to point out that are very useful, especially for configuring hybrid. So your first step on our WebSense homepage is to click on Support. Then you get the search filter that pops up right here. We can type in whatever we want, just kind of like a Google search. So my first piece will be typing in hybrid. And hit search. Okay, now I want to go ahead and narrow this down a bit. So I'll go ahead and go to Web Security, Web Security Gateway Anywhere, or like I said, if you are on version 8.0 or above, it's going to be called AP Web right here. So you would select that. In this case, I'm just selecting Web Security Gateway Anywhere. I don't want to narrow it down too far, but I can also select both. But if you get down to a version, it'll ask you specifically which product you have. So because I don't want to go down to a particular version, I want to kind of see all the information possible on hybrid, I'm not going to select a specific version in this one. But if you have something that you want to find out about hybrid, that you want to find out information that's specific to your version, then I would recommend going ahead and clicking on the version that you own. So you can see by just typing in the word hybrid and hitting search and narrowing down my options just a bit, I get quite a bit of information on the hybrid service. If I scroll down, I can see that almost all of these links relate directly to configuring hybrid. So there's a lot of good information here. One in particular though, one link that I want to point out is this link right down here called Configure the Hybrid Service. It can be found pretty easily if you just type in configure hybrid. And you can see it's the first link that pops up. So we'll go ahead and select that real quick, and I'll just give you an overview of what's on there. Essentially, this page will give you the exact steps needed to activate your hybrid filtering. It's pretty simple, and it steps you through step by step in an orderly fashion. So you just start off with activating the service, defining filtered locations, etc., etc. And then the next article that I wanted to point out, that's a great article for hybrid, is going to be found by typing in Best Practices Hybrid. So it's kind of like just doing a Google search, right? If you type in the right keywords, the right information will show up. So you can see this article right here is really the one I wanted to point out. It's called Best Practices Suggestions for Configuring Hybrid. So if I click on this, you can see that the article comes up and it gives a very good description of some of the best practices to use when configuring your hybrid service. So after you watch today's video tutorial, if you have any other questions or anything like that, I absolutely recommend going to those 2 pages that I just highlighted on our support portal and kind of running through those and see if you can find the answer to your question. If not, then I absolutely recommend contacting the WebSense tech support, and they should be able to help you out with anything regarding the hybrid filtering. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and move on to some of the first steps in configuring our hybrid solution. So what I want to do is go to my Triton Manager. And I'll go ahead and log in here. I'm going to point out some things that you're going to need to initially do to get the hybrid service up and going. After you've logged in, the first thing I'm going to suggest doing is actually going to your actual Triton Manager server, looking at the services and making sure that you have the WebSense sync service installed, as well as the WebSense Directory Agent Service. Both of those need to be installed on your Triton Manager in order to utilize the hybrid service. If you don't see these in services, then what you can do is easily just click on your Triton installer. So if you've already installed it, it'll be under All Programs and then WebSense. And you'll just run the WebSense Triton setup. And remember to right click and run as admin. You'll run that. And then do a modify for web security and add those two services to your Triton installation. And it should take no more than 5 minutes. The installer will go through, install those, tell you they've been successfully installed. Just make sure the services start and you're good to go. So once you've verified that you have the Directory Agent Service and the Sync Service installed, your next step will be going into Web Security, going into Settings, and you want to verify that you have an email address put into the hybrid filtering column. So make sure this is how you kind of kick off the hybrid process. It's kind of the first step. Essentially, there will likely be nothing populated in here if you've never activated hybrid before. So you'll want to enter in an email address either of an administrator or a shared administrator mailbox that you and your security team use. So after you've entered in this email address, you'll hit OK and then hit Save and Deploy. And essentially what will happen is you'll receive an email, usually within about 24 hours, letting you know that the hybrid service has been activated. If you don't receive that email, make sure to check your spam folder if you have an email gateway solution in place, because a lot of times that email is caught by spam filters. If after about 24 hours you still don't receive an email and it hasn't been caught by your spam filter or anything like that, you should call into WebSense Tech Support and verify that the hybrid service has been activated, and they'll let you know, and if not, they'll help you get that particular piece activated. Also, something to look at is verify that you have the correct product level. So you're either going to see Web Security Gateway Anywhere if you're on version 7.8 or below, or you'll see AP Web listed here. And you may see hybrid module listed next to it. I'm not sure how that naming schema is going to happen with version 8.0. So those are two things you want to verify first. So after you've input this email address and hit the OK button and received an email confirmation that the hybrid service is active, you may receive a hybrid token in that email. And what you'll have to do is, in this little section right here, it'll give you an option to enter that token. So you'll enter that token, hit activate, hit OK and submit, save and deploy, and then your hybrid service should be activated from then on. So those are kind of your first preliminary steps. After you've done those steps, you'll want to go to your Directory Services tab. And you want to double check the way your directory services information is entered. So to give you an example, click on your directory, hit edit, and you want to verify that the full conical name is what you have entered here. So in this format, CN, OU, OU, etc., etc. That's the style of name you want to place in this box under full distinguished name. And then the password, and then when you test connection, it'll say connection succeeded. If you don't know how to gather this information, so this name for the service account that you're using to connect to your directory instance, what you can do is go onto a machine. So for example, I would go onto my Triton server, and I logged in as the service account that I wanted to use to connect to my Active Directory server. I can go to Start, Command Prompt, and do a gp result /r. And if we look right here under user settings, you can see the full canonical name of the user that's logged in. There may be other methods to get this information. This is the quickest way that I know of. So once we've verified that our Active Directory information is placed in there correctly, you want to hit OK and save and deploy. And then we'll go down to the actual hybrid configuration. So your first step in configuring hybrid is to configure a filtered location. Essentially, a filtered location is going to be a location that has either an on-premise proxy or all of the users from that location are going to be filtered by the hybrid service. Basically, you're letting our hybrid cloud know when a user is accessing the hybrid filtering from a location that you recognize. So, for example, if I have a company that has 2 proxies already in place, and I filter those users that are on-premise at that company transparently using WCCP. Essentially what I do is I would click Add. I would type in the name of XYZ company and give it something descriptive to kind of let you easily identify what location this is. Site A, maybe. Specify the time zone that the company is in. So Central Time. You have the choice to put in a single IP address. So if you have one public IP address, you'll place that in here. If you own a range of public IP addresses, you can utilize that method as well. Or you can specify it using a subnet. So basically with this type, you're letting the hybrid service know what public IP this traffic will be coming from. And that's how it knows how to appropriately filter the user when they're on-premise or not on-premise. So let's say, let's just give it a hypothetical one. So let's pretend that that's my IP address, my public IP. And it's asking me, how is this location filtered? So this particular location, I have on-premise proxies already there, and they're doing all my filtering for the users that are at that site. So what I want to do is I want to specify that this location actually has proxies there, and those users there are being filtered transparently, meaning they're using something like WCCP on-premise to redirect that traffic to those proxies, or they're utilizing policy-based routing via their firewalls, any kind of method of transparent redirection. If I were to choose explicitly, it means that the people at that site are utilizing a pack file to redirect their traffic, or that it means that those people there are pointing their browsers directly to the proxy itself using the proxy settings within the browser. So in this case, we're going to pretend it's transparently. Once I've done that and I've specified that site, I can hit OK, and it's added that site to my filtered locations. It gives me kind of a summary. Transparent mode is the mode that site uses for its on-prem proxies. And I selected this is the public IP of that site. Now I can also add a few more sites. So let's pretend that this particular site that I'm adding is going to be filtered by the hybrid service with no on-premise proxies at all. And I'm going to give it a fictitious IP address. Just note that this is the public IP of this fake site. This is the IP address that our hybrid cloud will see. Now, in this case, let's say that this site does not have any proxies on-premise there. This is maybe a small site with about 100 users, and maybe it's just not worth it to place a full proxy at that site, or you don't need the type of proxy granularity that you get from having an on-prem proxy at that site. What you can easily do is just say that this particular site, so anything coming from this IP address, is going to be filtered by the hybrid service. And we select OK. Now my last example is, what if you have a site that has proxies on-premise, but the site utilizes, like I said earlier, a pack file or maybe explicit proxy settings that are put into the browser to redirect traffic to those proxies that are on-premise. In this case, what we need to do is put those proxies in this list under Manage Explicit Proxies. So let's say site XYZ has one proxy at that site. I need to add that proxy first. So I'll type in the name, the IP address or the host name of that proxy's P1 interface, the port that I want to forward traffic to it on, so 8080, 8080 also for SSL, and then 2121 for FTP. Those are generally the ports that are used for proxies. If yours are different, you would put in different settings here. And then I hit OK. And my proxy would show up in this list. Okay, so essentially I'm just defining that those proxies that are on site at that site that uses an explicit proxy configuration. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. Now that I've specified those proxies that are at that particular site, and we'll call that XYZ company site C, and I'll go ahead and make that in 1 second. We'll go ahead and hit Add. So XYZ company C, or site C. Here is the IP address. I'm just going to make another one up. This is the public IP of that particular remote site. And they have a local proxy on site, but remember I said it was now traffic was forwarded explicitly at that site. So if I select explicitly, now I have to let the hybrid service know what those explicit proxies are at that particular site. So I'll hit Add, and then I'll see my drop down of that proxy that I listed earlier, and now I can select that and place it in this list. And I can place many proxies in this list. So if I have 2 proxies at that site or 3 proxies, then I can place them all in this particular list of proxies that are at that particular site. So those are kind of the 3 different scenarios that you would add sites to filtered locations with. So you can see in our list we have XYZ company site A, which uses transparent, meaning they're using WCCP or policy-based routing at that site to get the end user's traffic to the proxy. Site B doesn't have a proxy on premise, but I want to hybrid filter all those users. So essentially, it's not worth placing a proxy there just because of costs and the size of the site. So instead, I'm just going to filter all those users using the hybrid service. And then company site C. This is the site that has proxies on premise, but the user's traffic is getting directed to the proxy via the browser's proxy settings, either a pack file or by explicitly in the browser pointing to the proxy. So those are kind of the 3 situations that you could potentially use with the filtered locations piece. So then we want to go down to user access. I'm skipping over unfiltered destinations because it's not necessary for the configuration of the hybrid service. And I'll cover that after we've covered some of the main points and main steps in configuring the hybrid service. So in an earlier video, after you've configured the filtered locations, in an earlier video I went over how to actually create and deploy the endpoint. That will actually be the last step, and that's what this particular pack file relates to. But in the user access section, you define some variables for the hybrid service, and just read through these. They're kind of self-explanatory. The only one that's a little ambiguous right now, but I believe the wording will change in future version iterations, is this HTTPS notifications pages setting. This is actually the setting that allows for HTTPS traffic to be decrypted. So SSL decryption. If you want to do SSL decryption for the hybrid service, you will check this box right here, and you will click on this link right here that says View Hybrid SSL Certificate. What you can do is either the certificate will download, or it'll bring you to a page like this. Essentially, this is the certificate file that you need to deploy to your end users' Trusted Root Certificate Authority store in their browsers. So you can right click on this, copy it, put it in a notepad file, and label it hybrid cert.crt or CER, whatever you want to label it. But that cert needs to be deployed to the end user's Trusted Root Certificate Authority store in order for their hybrid traffic to be able to be decrypted. In the registered domains pieces, you want to register all of the domains that your end users would utilize for their email. The reason for this is if you decide to allow end users to register to the hybrid service on their own, this is what verifies that they are in fact part of your organization. So it will check to see if the email address that that user puts in is part of your registered domains portion. And then finally, the offsite user setting. Essentially, this allows users that are not in those filtered locations that we set earlier. This allows users that are not in those filtered locations to be filtered by the hybrid service. So, meaning if a user leaves a filtered location, the hybrid service will still filter their traffic. Essentially, that's the best way to go. So you always want to enable this setting. The reason is you want users' policies to follow them whether they're on-premise or off-premise, because they're still using company assets. So it doesn't matter if they get infected whether they're in your on-premise or off. If you don't enforce policy when they're off-premise, they could easily go to a malicious website, become infected with some type of malware, and then come right back into your network and bring that in. This allows those users to be filtered when they're off-premise as well. Right, now the fun part, hybrid user identification. So now we need to specify how these users will actually be identified. The first section kind of goes over the web endpoint. That is the best way to kind of filter your remote users. And I have a whole tutorial that talks about how to create and deploy the web endpoint. Go ahead and watch that tutorial once we're done with this particular piece of the configuration. So before deploying any endpoints, you want to make sure you have your hybrid configurations configured correctly. This is where you configure how you want users to authenticate to your environment. Generally, the defaults are the best to use, and I believe that'll be use NTLM and always authenticate on first access. I would leave these as is. If you do start running into issues with user identification, you may want to try unchecking the always authenticate on first access setting. This piece usually requires some testing. So just make sure that before you go out and deploy the endpoints to all your users and start funneling them through the hybrid cloud, you have some test machines to actually test the functionality on. This is a great tool right here if you hit Verify End User Configuration. So once you've configured all your hybrid settings and you have your users set up, you can copy this link and paste it into your hybrid test machine, and it'll let you know if the user's browser is configured properly to use the hybrid cloud and if everything's working okay in it. Same with this below link. What this does is kind of gives you a test of the latency that the hybrid cloud filtering introduces, which is not very much at all. I generally question vendors that say latency is near nothing when using their hybrid filtering. The reason is, if latency is nothing, how much inspection is actually being done when the traffic reaches their cloud? Something to think about. So those are kind of the main settings in this hybrid user identification piece. For more information, you can always go to the help menu and do an explain this page, and it'll bring you to a help page that explains exactly what's on the page that you're on. Also remember the find answers column to the right. This bubbles up to the top all of the most commonly searched on terms for this particular page. You can also type in any search term right here in the Find Answers section, and it will link you directly to our WebSense support page and narrow down your product and version for you. Very useful. Alright, shared user data. So your first step here will be first to test the connection. So always make sure that you have a connection basically to our hybrid service. Then you'll want to go ahead and what you'll first see up in this column is a default context. I recommend selecting that and deleting the default context. So mine has already actually been configured, but if you click on that like I just did, you'll see a default context that's already in here, and you just select it and hit delete. You shouldn't have any issues doing this. If an error message comes up top right here, then you likely need to go into directory services and, like I showed earlier, reconfigure them to utilize the full conical name in the directory services configuration. So in this piece, what you're basically doing is you're defining the user information that will be synced up to our cloud so users can be identified when going through the hybrid service. So in this section, after you've removed the default context, you want to add a new one. You can just go ahead and click Add. Okay, and you'll get something that looks like this. This will show your directory tree. And your goal here is to narrow down the directory tree as close as you can to the users that are in your environment. So if you have maybe one folder or one OU that contains all of your users, that you would essentially check that and hit Set as Included Context. So for example, in my OU, I have an OU that contains all of my users, groups, and service accounts. That's essentially the one I want to check right here. So you want to essentially tell the hybrid service to look through these particular OUs because they contain all of my groups and my users in my environment. That's what you're trying to do here. So this green checkbox with the that's filled in kind of the opposite of these ones, that means that this is the included context, the OU lab, and it's going to search throughout all of the below ones for that user information. Now let's say most directory Active Directory structures are not as organized as this. You'll probably have several different OUs and maybe only 3 of them contain user and group information. So they're basically the OUs that have all your users in them, the OUs that have all your groups in them, and you may have some that have sites, etc. You just want to make sure that all of those are checked and you set as include context there. So once you've done that, you'll hit OK. And essentially it will likely ask you whether you want to set, while you're setting those up and in the screen, it'll ask you if you want to set context only, what level of groups do you want to look through. I put all levels. So just do a little research on this particular step when you get a chance. Like I said, when you click on this page, you can always go to help and explain this page. It'll explain all the ins and outs of this. Also, those two documents that I referenced at the beginning do a very good job at describing this particular piece. But like I said, essentially the context is basically telling the hybrid configuration what users and groups you want to sync to the cloud. So once that's done, you'll hit OK and do a save and deploy. Remember, you need to always hit OK until the yellow save and deploy comes up. Once that comes up, hit save and deploy and it will save all your changes. So then we can go to scheduling. This is basically explaining when to send the user data, the policy data, the reporting data to the cloud. And if, for whatever reason, you only allow traffic to go out to the web through the proxy server that's on-premise at your site, then you can configure this traffic to go through that proxy server by using this setting here. So in my instance, this is pretty self-explanatory. We see the send on dates. This is when I want to send it generally. If you have a very large AD infrastructure, you probably want to schedule this to send at a slower time period or a time of less traffic running through your environment. And then collect and retrieve reporting data. So all of the traffic that your hybrid users produce, when they're filtered through our cloud, their data gets sent back down to your on-premise reporting. So you can report on all of your hybrid users right from this console. Essentially what you're doing here is scheduling when you want that reporting data to be sent down to your on-premise SQL server and how often you want it to reach out and retrieve that data. So defaults usually work out pretty good. I would recommend kind of leaving them as is. So once you've got all these configured and you're in the scheduling piece, I would hit send on the send user data and then send on the send policy data now. Essentially, the policy and user data will get synced after you make changes, but the sync time is set to about every 15 minutes or so. But if you make a change and you want that change to be reflected right away, then you can come into the scheduling page and hit either one of these. So let's say you make a change to your Active Directory structure, or you add a new user, or you add a user to a group, and you need that change to take effect immediately rather than just letting it do it on its own. Then you can come in here and hit Send Update Now. Or let's say you make a change to a policy. It'll take about 15 to 30 minutes for it to be reflected to your hybrid users. If you need it to be reflected sooner than that, you can hit Send, and this will send that policy update immediately to the cloud. So let's go into Custom Authentication. Essentially, there are some programs and applications out there that don't work well when going through a proxy infrastructure or a hosted proxy infrastructure like our hybrid cloud. This setting basically gives you the ability to specify what user agent strings those applications use or what destinations they go to, and you can specify whether you want them to bypass authentication or bypass scanning. A great way to kind of troubleshoot traffic that's going through our hybrid cloud. And now let's go back up to Unfiltered Destinations. So in the Unfiltered Destinations piece, once everything has been configured like we just went over, you want to put in things like your OWA access or destinations maybe that users access that don't necessarily need to be filtered by the hybrid cloud. They should be destinations that are safe and that you trust. You can kind of get a description right here. It says exactly pretty much what this does. It can include organizational webmail, internal sites, or sites that are not accessible from the internet. So these are just sites that you don't want the hybrid service to scan when a user goes to them. And there could be several reasons for that. So just know that that availability is right here. I'm not going to speak on the mobile integration piece because that's a whole nother piece. Essentially, we have a mobile piece that integrates with our hybrid filtering that is a part of our mobile integration with AirWatch. So if you would like some information on that, please contact your local WebSense sales team, and they should be able to get you more information on the mobile integration with AirWatch. All right, essentially that's all the pieces of hybrid filtering. I think we've covered them fairly well. If there are any questions, please first try to utilize the help menu here to the right, the Find Answers column, as well as the help options. They provide a lot of great information that can help you find the answers that you're looking for. Also, you can always reference those articles that I went over earlier in this video. That should help you as far as finding out a lot of good information and best practices about how to configure the hybrid service. Thanks again. I appreciate you guys watching.